Friday edition of the debate. We called it, of course, The World This Week. You can join in via Twitter, the hashtag TWTW. You can get tweets through via my own webpage, which is at MarkOwenF24. We've had one comment so far. The number of 100-year-olds plus in the electoral roll in Zimbabwe seems shady to me. We're expecting much more to come. Let me introduce you to our guests once again. Anne Penketh is a journalist from the Independent, and thank you for joining us. Anne comes from the same region as me in the United Kingdom, which I was glad to find out. Aye, so people from the northwest of England always have opinions, so that's why we've got Anne. Fantastic. On the other side of our studio, a French-Syrian freelance journalist and photographer, Ammar Abd Rabbo. He was discussing his film tastes before we went to the break. We discussed that a little bit more, but to find out more on that, you need to go into the PRISM surveillance website to find out more on that. Philippe Moreau-Chevrolet joins us from not the Nouvel Observateur, but Le Plus, which is the interactive website of the Nouvel Observateur.
Right.
Everybody abroad knows Nouvel Obs, so obviously your website will get lots of hits after this.
Oh, thank you.
And I hope the bosses are happy with you for that.
Hopefully.
Cool, thank you. A man with great opinions. Last but not least, Emma Kate Symons, who is correspondent for the Australian Financial Review. Good to see you. We're starting to talk this half about Pope Francis. So is he Pope of the poor? Is he a rock star Pope? His trip to Brazil certainly rallied the faithful, but I wonder what some of those people thought about the Pope's words on homosexuals. Let's listen.
Everyone writes about the so-called gay lobby. I have yet to see someone in the Vatican handing me out an identity card with gay written on it. If someone is gay and he's searching for the Lord and has goodwill, who am I to judge?
I was Christian Catholic, so these words kind of like shook me. Anybody else here want to start this one about the significance of what the Pope has just said?
I believe it's really change has come to Vatican with this sentence. Seriously, I mean, the main sentence for me here is not about homosexuality, but is the who am I to judge?
Precisely.
I mean, because the Pope has such legitimacy from God, so in a way he's denying it, and it's probably the first time in history these words are said. So that's really the big major event of this trip for me.
Do we believe him, Em?
But that's what really puzzled me, actually, because everybody was saying that on the doctrine this actually changes nothing. And so here you have this this sweet guy, very modest person, sort of modelling himself on St. Francis of Assisi, and when he said that, who am I to judge? I thought, but you're the Pope, that's your job. So it's just left me quite bewildered, actually.
I don't know, though, because I don't think as the Pope he's really supposed to judge. As a Catholic, I think I was taught when I was a child that you leave that up to God. And in fact, I was looking at some Orthodox Catholic reactions to his words, because, of course, in the mainstream press and also a lot of those activists for gay marriage or gay rights were very excited. But I read an Orthodox Catholic who said actually the headline should have been "The Pope upholds church teaching," because, in fact, if you go back to encyclicals and the writings of Pope John Paul II, he said some very similar things, even wrote them about not discriminating against homosexuals. And the tradition has always been, it really depends on the tone, but love the sinner but hate the sin. What was interesting was what he didn't say, because he didn't go the next step, the Pope, in his comments with the journalists. He didn't feel the need to refer them to the catechism or the teaching on this, that, the sin itself is wrong and we must hate it or deplore it, but while loving the homosexual. So I think it's true, the tone is totally different, but he hasn't departed from the teaching at all. And it was Jesus who said, who am I to judge, when an allegedly adulterous woman was brought before him.
Yes,
he said...
But you notice that there's a major difference between Jesus and the Vatican, So.
Of course. No, but I'm just saying in terms of the continuity, I think, as you say, his personality, his tone is very different, and he's for the poor. And, I mean, evidently he's not going to make as much of an issue out of sexual morality as previous popes might have. But then on the other hand, he opposed gay marriage vehemently in Argentina and ran into a huge battle with Cristina Kirchner there. So, it's not necessarily good news for people who are claiming it to be good news for their interests, or in my view.
I was just so taken by the fact he spoke about this issue and put that as you said, this who am I to judge? But you're saying really it's God's job to judge, and he's being clever. That's what you're saying, isn't it?
Well, I think he might be occasionally miscast as this quiet reformist. He is a reformist, but as a liberal. I mean, because he's a Jesuit, we tend to think he might be socially liberal. But I think the difference is in nuance and tone. But I don't see any departure from church teaching on issues such as homosexuality and even abortion,
and women
contraception.
priests. In the same conversation, he ruled out women priests being allowed as well.
Perhaps he'd have made more impact, Philippe, had he decided to make a comment that said, okay, why don't you use condoms in Africa? That'll stop the spread of AIDS.
Yes, he doesn't go that far. He's building an image, this Pope. What the new thing is from his predecessor is that he is willing to talk to the people outside of the church. Benoit XVI was obviously talking much to the inside of the church and referring to the inside, to the text, to the inside of the church. And this one is a rock star, as you said. He wants to conquer the masses, to rally the masses. So he has an ambiguous tone sometimes, ambiguous phrases, ambiguous words. But what is interesting in his image is that he's willing to go towards the poor, and this discourse on this speech about social conditions and about the poor is very, very new, and it's exactly what the people are waiting for, and they're waiting for the elites to talk about their situation, and the economic crisis is huge. So the Pope is trying to talk to the people down in the society, not to the elite, not to the church. This Pope is new from that perspective, and I think it's interesting.
What's the comment as a result of being in Brazil, or do we think it's something he was planning to say all along?
Yes, the Vatican has been accused of being controlled by a gay lobby, so he had to comment at one time or another, and that's stupid, of course, but he had to say something.
So where does this leave the Pope then in terms of what we think of him? Do we think he's the genuine article? Do we think he is this Pope of the poor? Do we think it's all a kind of smoke and mirrors Vatican manipulation?
I think it's so far it's style over substance, actually, when you look at the doctrine.
Would you agree, Ammar?
I don't know him enough. I don't know the case, but unfortunately, we live in a society where the image and the layout is very important.
Many people blame television.
Yeah, television and
this image is a
our
sense.
media.
I'd rather like this kind of church than the previous church. So, I mean, it's good for the Pope to be to talk about poverty. I mean, it's good to it's a good thing in itself. And immigrants,
He was in
what he said in
Lampedusa this
Lampedusa, it
week.
was great.
Yeah.
Who is crying for Africa, for these African people crossing the Mediterranean and dying in the Mediterranean while trying to go in the West?
Does that kind of gesture then, throwing that wreath into the Mediterranean, saying that, does that mean more than, say, John Paul II when he used to get off the aircraft and kiss the tarmac wherever he landed? I mean, that was a big gesture saying, look, I'm part of you, look, I respect your country, I want to be part of you. The Pope already, do you think he's made more impact than all the popes before?
No, I think he's in the tradition of John Paul II, actually. I think you could really compare them to charismatic figures who came from unexpected places, one from Poland, one from Argentina. And in fact, I mean, Pope John Paul II developed a very complex doctrine, social doctrine, developing teaching against poverty, and in fact, big critiques of capitalism and not just of communism. So I think I see the two as much more similar, actually. And obviously Ratzinger was of a different style and tone, but he had a lot of scandals on his hand that weren't necessarily of his making. And you know, it's true he wore ermine slippers and he had nice watches and he had a different style.
But the Pope is like Obama. They think about the media. They think about communication in the Vatican. Most of the leaders do now, but not all the leaders have this global reach as he has. So he can really be a rock star like Bono or like this. I say Bono because of you, because I guess you like Bono, but that's...
yeah, who doesn't? Who doesn't?
Yeah, that's the kind of figure he can be. He can achieve that thing. Some leaders don't understand it. In France, we have a leader that doesn't understand what communication is, but maybe he should talk to Pape François.
Indeed.
Yes,
Or
they should have a conversation on communication.
Indeed, so maybe sleep in a Jesuit cell. Or might sort something out. Okay, let's talk. Let's bring in another reaction here on Twitter. The Pope said, "If a gay person seeks repentance, quote, who am I to judge?" And that was the context. Any thoughts on that, dear panelists?
Some friend of mine was asking if a gay person does not seek repentance, what is the Pope's position on it? You know, so
that's the interesting thing, I suppose, isn't it?
I mean, it's always like this, these conversations in a plane, you take one sentence out of it. Of course, he was talking about the gay lobby, so probably not about the gay way of life or the gay in general.
It's just
Brazil. About...
Brazil, a notoriously party-centered city. Rio, of course, a huge gay community. I mean, he's obviously seen a few things when he's been there.
You think it's the first time? Or?
I daren't even speculate. Emma, get me out of that one.
He spoke for an hour and a half, so I think that there was something in there for everyone. But journalists look for something new, and when they see a bit of conflict going on, and obviously the gay comments seemed like a bit of a departure. But I think as far as I understood, he referred constantly to the Catechism and the fact that if you are homosexual, you're supposed to remain chaste, which is linked to this thing of repentance. So it's not necessarily endorsement coming from him, but of course, I mean, I think it's great that he's showing this softer side, and he's not coming down so hard at such a hard line kind of approach as the church has been associated with.
Is there a sense? I'll turn to Anne. I'll turn to Philippe. Is there a sense that the Pope here might be on a sales job? The roll call's falling in Brazil, even, which is the most populated Catholic country in the world. He needs to get literally bumps on seats in churches all around the world, keep things rolling that way. Is it in some way a little nice bit of marketing?
Of course, yeah, obviously. And as Philippe says, they've got he's got a whole press department behind him as well. That presumably the old guy who you could see standing just behind him on the plane.
He's a missionary. His mission is to convince people to join the Catholic Church. That's the very reason for his being on the stage. So he has to do the job, and they do it well. They really do it well.
Indeed.
From a communication perspective. Now, so it's
the
job is
charming
done.
the media, charming journalists with on the record.
He's the Pope of the poor, so it's
for...
charming the media. Of course, it's a charismatic figure. He cleans the feet of the poor. It's huge. It's a huge image. We have a minister in France, Manuel Valls, is been marking cows with a red iron. That's a powerful image too. You can create these images in politics. That's easy. That's powerful, but you have to really to have a thinking behind it. That's the question about this Pope. Does he really have a thinking behind the image?
Do you think?
I have to say that I like Philippe's way of comparing, because we had Cahuzac compared to Mugabe, and now Manuel Valls to the Pope. So
that was very nice. That wasn't very nice to Mugabe. I mean,
no.
I think Mugabe lies less, maybe.
Okay. Well, clearly,
at least he knows that he is lying.
As the first Latin American Pope, there's this aspect of trying to rejuvenate the faith within those countries as well. Let's come back to Africa, because clearly Africa is the place where the Pope, where Catholicism is growing, could make a big difference. If he made that pronouncement, say, about the use of condoms, or maybe the words on homosexuality might be well heard over there, given 37 African countries outlaw homosexuality. He has to turn to Africa at some stage and say something. What do you think he's going to say? What would you want him to say to Africa? What would you want him to do to help Africa? What would you want him to help Catholics in Africa and everybody else?
Well, he has to keep talking about poverty, because clearly that's a huge issue in a continent that's still so underdeveloped. People victims of some of the poorest countries in the world, and yet there's a growing Catholic community there. So, I mean, I saw today that the Pope made, it's not necessarily reference to Africa, but remarks about the importance of dialogue and communication with Muslims, with the people of Islamic faith. Now, this is not new, but he made the point of speaking at the day when Ramadan is supposed to be ending. So he's really making overtures there. And in Africa, in some countries, there are real conflicts between Muslims and Christians. So perhaps that could also play into a bigger role for the Catholic Church there.
Indeed, I'm thinking Nigeria the moment you say that. Let's take a brief pause, give the panellists something to think about. James Creedon's waiting in the wings of our studio to join us and bring, as ever, his unique regard on what's happening online, offline, on every line, basically. James, very good to see you, as ever. Where would you like to start, sir?
All right, well, why not with one social media storm during the week. This is in the UK, over the new £10 note with Jane Austen appearing on it as the first woman appearing on a British bank note. Now, a number of female journalists championed this cause, notably Caroline Criado Perez, and afterwards they were basically
She's the lady
treated...
in red on the right.
That's right.
Yeah.
Basically, they were treated to a barrage of abuse and threats via Twitter as a result, because this was a campaign that partly began on social media, etc. And she had, I think, a petition with tens of thousands of people supporting her campaign, and up to 50 messages an hour, Mark, threatening to rape her via social media, and even messages.
50 messages
from
men, I presume, threatening to rape her.
Right, and it's the usual cowardice of these trolls who feel free to say things that they would probably never follow through on because
so that's another one there.
That's another one because it got even worse. And
bomb's been placed outside your home. It will go off at exactly 10:47 p.m. on a timer and trigger destroying
And
everything.
she wasn't the only journalist to receive that threat.
This is so sinister, isn't it?
That's right.
Dreadful.
Now, Mary Beard was another journalist who got similar threats. Now, I won't read out what it was very vulgar. But
it is very vulgar.
What she did is to send. It was threatened that she would send a copy of that to his mother. Somehow, somebody managed to get the address of the troller's mother, and he quickly climbed down from what he'd been saying. Now, Kathleen Moore, another British journalist, who has basically been saying, we need to boycott Twitter. She's been calling for a Twitter boycott, a trolley day rather, or a trolley day as in holiday, this Sunday. And that in itself has launched a big debate, Mark, about freedom of speech, whether or not this boycott would actually be effective or whether or not it would encourage these trolls. Some saying, look, it's not the way to end trolling. In fact, exposing them and talking about it more is the best way forward. Others saying boycott over Twitter faces boycott over allowing free speech. That headline in Forbes magazine is quite facetious. Just a quick mention of a similar debate in France recently, Mark, over anti-Semitic tweets. In fact, Twitter has now revealed information a couple of weeks ago to the French authorities after a request made by the Union of French Jewish Students, who see this as a big success in preventing hate speech. So it is a whole debate that comes out every time. Protecting freedom of speech or cracking down on hate speech?
James, why don't we pause it there and bring our panellists back in to talk about that one? Because clearly, Twitter is something that we on this programme encourage the use of. We try to get people to take part via Twitter. Give us your reaction. I'll start with you, Anne. Give us your reaction to this kind of story, this situation that befell this poor woman in the UK.
I don't agree with what Kathleen Moran is saying. That I think that's just counterproductive and weak, really. You can report it to the police in the case of the woman who campaigned for the Jane Austen picture on the banknote. That's what happened. You can retweet to all your followers, of which that woman now has 23,000 followers. The kind of abuse that they're getting to shame them. Or you can block. You could try blocking them. However, because of the cover of anonymity, once you block one, then another 100 pop up, and that's the really scary thing about this. Actually, I think it's the anonymity, and that's what's good about the French government getting the anti-Semitic details of those accounts. I think.
Emma Kay, what would you do about it?
Well, I think that feminists are right to say that it can't just be left to the police and just be a legal matter. It's really important that Twitter, as it was forced to do in France, because it resisted for a while in assisting with this inquiry into this barrage of anti-Semitic hate speech on Twitter, did. They have to give the information, and they say they're working on a new kind of logiciel, software. So my French and English getting mixed up. New software so that you can actually report the hatred straight away. But even myself, I don't get much of this kind of many of these kinds of attacks on Twitter. But the other day, someone sent me something from an account, and it was a very with a horrible expletive that's always applied to a woman. I tried to retweet it, I couldn't click onto his account. It was all very odd. I'm on Twitter, but I found it annoying that I wasn't able to expose this person, and yet there it is. It's still online. So there's obviously problems. But I saw there was a great piece that we were referred to by Tanya Gold in The Guardian. I think we all read, and she said that we need to be careful not to bring the police in. We've got to sort it all out and expose it on Twitter. And she said the threat to rape is not rape. But that's a pretty slim line. If you make that kind of threat in person and send letters and make telephone calls, you're going to get more than just a simple kind of charge for harassment. Isn't it worse than harassment? Do we need to create new new kind of criminal.
It's this horrible idea of
definitions.
intimidating people, of making that kind of horrible feeling in your mind that something could happen, which is absolutely dreadful. We'll talk a bit more about this in a moment. James, tell us more about the things you found.
All right, well, just two other issues I wanted to highlight online this week. This isn't a new one, but Baba Jukwa, he has been revealing in Zimbabwe very private details about Mr. Mugabe's party for several months now, going back to March. He has a Facebook page with over, I think, 344,000 followers now. And this week, during the election in Zimbabwe, a person who, whoops, that's going a bit far, supported Baba Jukwa, who shouted out one of his slogans at a polling station, got 3 months in prison. So there is a real concern, I think, in Zimbabwe about the elements that this apparent party insider has been revealing, such as elements about Mr. Mugabe's health, apparent prostate cancer. He managed to predict 3 days beforehand the rather untimely death of the former mining minister, who may or may not have been assassinated. So it's very, very unhelpful, I think, for the Zimbabwean and Mr. Mugabe's power. And there has been people saying, look, if you look at the Arab Spring, social media became a vital tool in breaking down psychological barriers. You look at the average age of leaders in Africa, it's 63 or upwards. The average age, population-wise, is 19. A lot of these people are tech-savvy, and you can see that somebody like him becomes a focal point for a lot of discontent with regimes such as Mugabe's. So perhaps a sign of the times and how things are changing quickly.
Okay. James, are you done?
Pretty much done. I can leave you with maybe
go ahead.
one front page from Mr. Berlusconi. The delinquent has been sentenced. That is one Italian newspaper from this week, and worth looking at, or from this morning, worth looking at. Il Giornale, owned I think by Berlusconi's brother. They were left without words because of what happened. So it's a pretty easy article to write.
Senza parole.
Yes.
I like it. The Delinquent, that was a good one too. James Creedon, as ever, thank you very much.
Thanks,
indeed.
Mark.
James Creedon, our media editor, yeah? That's way to
That's it.
describe it. Good man. Let's take up again the issue about Twitter and internet safety, because clearly this is a very big, broad issue. And Emma Kate was saying about this whole idea of this kind of, but I suppose you were saying that a threat is a threat, and that's as important as anything, and that still is an offence, isn't it? Because I suppose if you said these things to someone face to face in public, that would be a threat. You would be committing a crime.
Sure. I mean, you could make a report to the police. So I think it's important that people go to the police, but it has to be done in conjunction with Twitter reforming its whole approach and becoming far more responsive, far more quickly, because these things are happening in split seconds, as we know. And I mean, I saw also there was the British parliamentarian who supported the campaigner for the Jane Austen on the banknote, who was also received the same kind of vile threats. I mean, it's just so bizarre, and that when you campaign for Jane Austen, as Tanya Gold said, I mean, don't these people know that her last novel was Persuasion? I mean, it's just sort of horrible that, and if there was no Jane Austen, the British would only have the Queen on the banknote.
Indeed.
So it's. But
the Queen is a woman.
Pardon?
The Queen is a woman too.
But she is, but she's there by virtue of her birth. So I mean.
In terms of the role that the Twitter, that the internet played in the Arab Spring, for instance, I mean, there was obviously it was a vital and refreshing and inspirational role, wasn't it? And this kind of issue really does kind of take away from that success, doesn't it?
It was. I mean, in the Arab, I don't like the word spring, but in the Arab revolutions, it broke the barrier of fear. And here, obviously, it breaks also the barrier of fear in another way, in a bad way. People, as you said, wouldn't say that in a pub or in any place, in a school. I mean, Philippe probably know that there are some issues on internet. As soon as you write something about it, you will have a flood of very bad messages, of threats, of people saying you're a liar, you're an agent for this or for that, or you're not honest, or you're blah. And I guess all these are new media for us. I mean, they're like, 3, 4, 5 years old, and we will find the way to discipline everyone, and I mean, ourselves and people who are abusing of it. I remember when I was a kid, with the telephone, that was quite new for me as a kid. We'd call numbers and just hang out, and
phone pranking.
You know, and nobody does it today because there are a way to see who's calling you, caller ID, things like that, and it seems totally ridiculous. And so I guess maybe in 5 or 10 years there would be other ways to
I
discipline.
think there's something different about this, which is actually the targeting of women, and that's what I find deeply disturbing, because you do wonder whether these trolls actually want to bar women from being in a public place.
There is a saying.
It's misogyny.
There is a saying that
Very
says,
quickly, please.
"Don't feel the troll." And so the problem is when you talk about that, you reinforce the phenomenon. So you give it too much importance, I guess.
And you give it the oxygen of publicity, as we say.
When
Okay.
you have freedom of speech, you've got every bad things that can happen. In the U.S., you can have Nazis walking in the street in the uniform. I mean, that's bad, of course, but there are 10 people, and the country is 260
This conversation, I know,
million
will
people.
continue in this studio after the end of this programme, which is now. Thank you all for joining us, The World This Week. You're watching France 24. Do stay with us.